We decided to have two senior executives, two CEOs from small and medium-sized businesses. And the reason I think that's interesting is because unlike in fairy tales, as I like to say, usually the big guy wins. And here's an example of two leaders in relatively mid-sized companies that have done so well. So we hope to learn from them some of the ideas behind their success.
So Ainsworth Pet Nutrition is an 85-year-old family-controlled company. I joined the company roughly 10 years ago. The primary brand up until about 75 years ago was a regional value-oriented brand called Dad's, after which the company was named, and we subsequently rebranded under a different corporate umbrella called Ainsworth. We were largely a regional-oriented, opening price point, category problem-solving company, dealing closely with customers. Consumers were important, but customers were the key gateway for us, and that was our point of difference, working in what we call a customer-intimate way to drive solutions that mattered to our retail partners that would ultimately help them address consumer needs in the pet space. We looked at that formula, which had worked for us for 75 years, and about 10 years ago decided it was not a winning formula for the next 75 years, that we needed to pivot away from our reliance on opening price point and value into the premiumization trend that was sweeping not only the pet sector, but more broadly for probably 2 decades prior, the human space. So we made a strategic transformation, kind of a bet the company bet, on a partnership with Rachel Ray, the celebrity chef, and built a brand called Nutrish in association with her team that has moved us from roughly 95% of our revenue being value-oriented, lower margin, slower growth, to now over 90% of our portfolio tied up in super premium, higher margin, higher growth. And so Nutrish is very much the centerpiece of our new journey.
CBA, I like to say, Craft Brew Alliance, is a bit of a work in progress. And just to kind of put it on the map for everybody, we're about a $220 million revenue company. We are publicly traded on NASDAQ. Our symbol is Brew, B-R-E-W. We're 32% owned by Anheuser-Busch, so there's a lot of interesting elements to kind of our corporate structure. If you look at the journey of the company, though, it is definitely similar to what Jeff just alluded to, not necessarily linear. The company was founded in 2008 by the merger of two founding craft breweries, Widmer Brothers Brewing out of Portland, Oregon, and Red Hook Brewing out of Seattle, Washington. And then in 2010, the company acquired Kona Brewing out of Hawaii. Today, as I sit here, the Kona brand, which has been growing in double digits for basically the last decade, will touch probably 55 to 60% of our revenue by the end of the year, while those foundational brands like Widmer Brothers and Red Hook have kind of fallen to be combined, smaller than the size of the Kona brand. We very proudly call our strategy Kona Plus. So we try to combine the power of a lifestyle brand like the Kona brand with roots in Hawaii, with a number of local and regional strong powerhouses that allow us to tap into a couple of trends that are happening in the industry.
So what consumer insights, whether it was in hindsight or in anticipation, that you think led to the success of Kona so much?
With Kona, what we found is it's a brand that is just a very relevant brand to a lot of consumers because the brand is rooted, back to the authenticity point. The ethos of the brand is all about Hawaii. We call it Liquid Aloha. And not only is Hawaii and Liquid Aloha an easy concept for consumers to understand, it's almost globally relevant to everybody. The key is not trying to force things on consumers, but to really, as basic as it sounds, let the brand be relevant to the folks that it's relevant to, and then resource around that to amplify it.
And Jeff, in your case, you said for 75 years you were doing pretty much the same thing, and then you had Nutrish. So talk a little bit about how it came about, and what was the consumer trends or insights that you were noticing that led to this idea, or was it stumble along like similar to Andy, or was it sort of more strategic in your case?
There was an understanding and recognition of what were the broader human adjacency trends on premiumization, clear evidence through our data mining to suggest that the consumer more broadly in pet was beginning to trade up. We weren't necessarily seeing that in the mainstream channel, as I define it, food, drug, mass, that we competed in, but we saw an opportunity sort of at the intersection of the human and pet sector trends outside of our channels to suggest that the mainstream consumer might be ready for the trade-up. We've done a lot of work, largely in conjunction with the borrowed equity that is Rachel Ray, who is authentic, accessible, approachable, more down home, to create a solution that we think meets the needs of all of North American pet families, not just those that want to make a special trip or can afford the time and the gas money and the premium to buy a solution that historically, up until 10 years ago, was only found in pet channel outlets.
So for us, it's making sure that the selling proposition is relevant at every level in terms of the channel strategy. So the trade-up opportunity has to be important. The margin has to be important. The margin has to be right for retailers and right for the wholesalers, as well as making sure that the price point supports what the consumer feels they're getting in terms of value. So I think really understanding holistically how you take a brand like, you know, somebody who wants Liquid Aloha, and how do you translate that through the entire value chain? Might sound like it's a pretty mundane task, but I would say it's pretty critical.
When you enter, what is the competitive reaction? How did the large players respond? And how did it affect you, if at all?
A lot of the things that we learned and a lot of the traditional pricing models are really nice theoretically in a conference room, but I think the difficulty is translating that into a bar or a restaurant. We try to basically come in with a position that makes a statement about the brand and also delivers the right value throughout the chain. Because in the absence of really knowing about a lot about the brand, I still think pricing matters.
How does a small company that doesn't have all the resources build its brand?
We built an innovation and insights team. So we leaned in. We probably spent more money in terms of people, MR, and process than a company of our size ever in a million years had a right to. But it occurred to us that for us to really make a mark in a very cluttered space with global titans, we had to be very sharp about what needs and problems we were addressing with our value proposition.
There's a self-awareness that's really important when you're a small company, to pick your battles and say, we're going to try to win in these markets. We're not going to try to win everywhere, because we don't have the resources to really do that. So for us, you know, the states of Oregon, California, Washington, and Hawaii represent over two-thirds of our business. So we double down there. And as a result, on the Kona brand, for example, we're able to have a pretty robust media program in Southern California, because we're not trying to do it nationally, we're not trying to do it everywhere.
How do you explain to stakeholders, if this is an issue that your heritage brands or your traditional brands are no longer the key growth drivers, is that an issue, or they're happy with, you know, the company overall is growing?
The consumer and the marketplace will tell us when a legacy brand or a heritage brand has outlived its usefulness. And I would acknowledge that we're getting close to the finish line in the case of that one heritage brand that I've referred to. The good news is that the marketplace has voted with their wallets in favor of Nutrish in, you know, disproportionate and differentiating ways, and I'm now indifferent as to what happens to the heritage brands.
How do you communicate that? You communicate it transparently, you communicate it regularly, and you communicate it unapologetically. On a brand like Widmer Brothers or Red Hook, we've been very explicit about the fact that we're retrenching those brands to their home market because we believe the brands had grown nationally at a time where the competition and the market was very different, and now they find themselves exposed in markets where they don't have the relevance, nor do we have the scale nor the resources to help those brands win. And if you're transparent about the journey, but you're still delivering fundamentally on who you are, I think both investors and employees and all stakeholders, they get the joke.
We're in the golden age of pets and have been for probably the better part of the past couple of decades, and I think everything that we can read by way of the next generation coming up in the form of millennials will continue that love affair in a fairly unabated way. We're not necessarily a first mover. You know, we don't have the benefit of some of those intelligence gathering devices, Ravi, that you just suggested, but we do have a fairly sophisticated insight mining apparatus.
What kind of trade-offs would you suggest? Limit yourself to a few, be everywhere where the consumer shops and buys and consumes. Like, any thoughts on that, Andy?
Yeah, you know, I think a little bit, as I said earlier, you know, don't be seduced into thinking everything everywhere is great. You know, I think we believe it's not just about having a great strategy, but it's about our ability to execute that strategy. And you can't execute everything everywhere when resources are finite. You know, I tell people, business-wise at least, the best decisions I've ever made have been in a bar, and the worst decisions I've ever made have been in a conference room. And you know, I think there's a lot of truth to that. Is if you can kind of figure out what channels can I compete in with the finite resources I have and with the competitive advantage I have, and unapologetically go after that, the other things will develop in time. But I think patience is really key.
Maybe talk about some of the mistakes you might have made along the way that a lot of the others can avoid making as they try, you know, succeeding here.
What's your vision? What's your mission? What are your value systems? You cannot be too repetitive in hitting those themes. It's your point of difference in the marketplace. I have found that the customers and consumers tend to embrace and adapt to evolving roles more quickly perhaps than your own organization or company will.
You know, for us, I think we've made a lot of mistakes. I'm proud of the fact we have. I hope we haven't made them multiple times. And I think one is, you know, failing to listen to what the brands are trying to tell you. If something isn't working really well for a while, there's probably a lesson there to be learned. And checking the ego at the door, I think is pretty important, because we like to believe we're all Supermen. You know, I joke with my team, we all throw the cape on and we think we can do things that others can't. Instead of really just looking in the mirror and saying, hey, am I really going to have a good probability of success with this, or is this a really good risk?